how to do a performant bar chart in HTML and CSS. In this video, I will show you how you can do an animated bar chart. I will begin with doing the design. So here I have Figma and I will draw the design. I will use a couple of prepared colors. A light blue one, the font I'm using is Montserrat. A stronger blue, and then lastly a dark blue for the text. Alright, now the colors. Let's draw the bar chart. So the window will have a background color of the light blue, and the bar chart could be done in a couple of different ways. So we could draw it right in HTML canvas with JavaScript, and that would work fine, but we also want the chart to be animated, and I think the easiest way to do that is to use as much CSS and HTML as possible and use the transition property if that's possible. But in our case, the bar chart and the bars are just rectangles, and those can just be divs. So I think it's quite doable to just draw the entire chart in HTML and CSS without using the canvas. And so I will try to do that and use the transition property to make the animations between states. Alright, so we begin with the bars and give them a color. Something like that. Then we also want a couple of lines for reference of the heights of the bars. So I will add lines that align with the top and goes a bit beyond the bars to the left, where we also put the value. So the highest one will be 100%. Make that a good size. Something like that maybe. And these should be the strong blue as well. And I also make the line dashed. Something like that. Make sure that it's aligned here as well. We can make this a bit smaller actually. I make this a group, which I duplicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, so we have 5 in total. And make sure that these have an even spacing, and the bottom one aligns with the bottom of the bars. So they should be 0%, 25%, 50%, and 75%. And we also want to make the text align. So I'll make them right aligned. That looks fine. I think I will do the lines a bit thicker as well. So let's say 2 maybe. Now to make it a bit more realistic in the drawing, we can give them a couple of different heights. Something like that maybe. And we want to make a chart that can display the value of different properties, but we don't know how many properties we will display, and therefore we don't know how many bars we want to display. And in some way we want to map one bar to the property name, what it displays. And it can be a bit tight to just write the name right below here, the property name here. So I think a better way to do it is to make an index for each bar, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and map them below to the property name. And therefore we can have a bit more space for the names, and that will scale better on small devices. So I draw a circle here. That was wrong. Circle. Something like that. Make that a group, and then we can duplicate it for the rest of the bars. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we also need to make sure that these are aligned. That looks all right for just a prototype. And the last thing we need to fix is the mapping to the names. So, well, we could draw that in a couple of different ways, but I think just a simple index and then a name to that. So let's say name 1, we can call it, for example. Make that a bit less bold. A group, duplicate. Now we have 5, so 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the names as well. Something like that. Now we have mapped each bar to a name, and I think this looks fine. The bars here are going to be animated when they change their value, and let's say that this is the web page, so we can maybe add a text as well. So animated bar chart. That looks all right, and then make that the text color that we specified. Something like that. All right, I think the design is finished. So now we need to create a project. So I will start a terminal window. And for this tutorial I will use Svelte and SvelteKit, but the principles will be the same for whatever framework you use. You could use React, Vue, Angular. Since I will be doing the animation and design in just HTML and CSS, a lot of the code will just be the same. Of course, there will be some difference in how you handle props or maybe state, but you will probably be able to follow along even if you don't use Svelte. All right, so create a Svelte app, then npm init svelte I will use the skeleton project with TypeScript syntax. I will write the code in to get a preview what we are working with. I start a Chrome tab here as well. Let's put it here. So I will use TailwindCSS for the styling, and so I'll begin with installing that. I just need to install the Svelte stuff before. Alright, so the Tailwind setup. And then I also need to modify the config file and the content array. And to make the styles from Tailwind actually apply to the website, I need to make a global CSS file which import the Tailwind styles. So I create app.css and add the Tailwind styles. I also know that I will be using Montserrat, which I used in the design. So I will paste in the link from Google Fonts API to get the Montserrat font. And I also want the background to be the light blue that we specified, and the font to be Montserrat, and the text color to be the one we specified in the design. Alright, and to make this apply to all the pages in SvelteKit, I will create a layout file, so layout.svelte, where I import the CSS file that I created. And to make all the pages on the same level and below render in this layout, I will add the slot tag. Alright, so maybe I should test if the Tailwind is actually working. So the page here, I can add a tag, let's say h1, and then we had the header animated bar chart. And let's say font bold, text. Alright, we need to, I like to have some specified sizes for texts and different screen widths and stuff like that when I'm actually building a real app. So I think I can add it here as well. So in the Tailwind config, I add some themes here. So I will extend and add a couple of values. And now I can use the size. So let's say this should be the size of header. And we can start the development server. So npm run dev in my case. I will get a link. Alright, it looks good. It seems like it's the correct font, and the background is the way we want it, the text color is correct. Now I think in this case the header might be a bit too small actually, so I will just add a custom size and maybe 2.5, and this should be italic as well. Now I want the content on the site to be centered, so in this case we will just have one page, but if we were to build an actual application and we want the same centering for all pages, I usually like to add the centering in the layout file, so I will add it here. So div, and add a slot inside that div, and this should be flex and flex column to render the children vertically, and then to make them centered, then items center. Just like that, so the text is now centered, and I like to add some padding for the content. So let's say padding top 6, padding right 2, padding left 2. That looks alright. Okay, so let's start building the actual bar charts. So I create a components folder, and I create the actual component which we will render the final chart. So bar, or actually I will create a subfolder for that, so bar chart up, and then add a bar chart component. And if you think about it, the chart is basically, it should be in some kind of container. Like here, inside this is the content, so we can just give it some color. And the bars will be contained in a subspace of that div. So let's make an area for that, give it some color. All right. But the lines and the percentages goes a bit outside that. So we will in some way need to specify how much they will go outside, and that should be responsive to different screen widths and sizes and such like that. And these index circles is below. So I think I will build one parent div, which then contains, and this parent div should be a flex and flex column, so it aligns its content vertically. And inside that, I add a flex that aligns its children horizontally. And inside that, I add two divs with different flex properties, so they take up different relative amount of space. And this is just a guess, and it doesn't really matter, but let's make this flex 1 and this one maybe flex 8 and give them a ratio. And then inside this big parent div, I will add another vertical flex box right here that we can put the circle index. All right, so let's build that. Open Chrome again. All right, so we create the parent div, so div, and make this flex column as we said. And inside that div, we create a horizontal div, so just flex on that one, since horizontal is the standard. And here we create the divs that make up the relative portion. So the first one, I don't think it should have any content, so let's just make it a relative size. So let's say flex 1 on this one, and the next one, this should actually have some content, so let's leave it open and say class flex 8. And since it's a custom value, I need to add brackets here. And to see what we are creating, I think we add some background color here, so it makes it a bit more visual. So let's say this one can be green, yellow, and now if I save this, nothing will render since we haven't specified a width. So for now it can be 500 pixels maybe, and then also specify a height. So let's make it 500 pixels on this one. And of course, to see the bar chart with the colors, we need to add it on the page. So let's add it here. So bar chart, and then close that. So now we can see it, and it has the expected colors with a square yellow, and this should be 1/9, I think, so 1 plus 8 divided, so 1/9 of the width, and that should be relative, so if I scale a window it shouldn't change and stuff like that. But now of course we have hard-coded the width, so the width won't change if I drag the window. And we can check this one as well, so let's say red 300, and we can see it is there. Alright, so now we need to add the bars, and I think we should create a bar component for that. And the bar is just a rectangle, so div, and since it won't contain anything, so we can close it right here. We add a background color, and in our Tailwind config we added the colors, and I call the strong one just blue. We say that it should be flex 1, and the height should be maximum, called full here. Alright, so that should be fine. Now we need to draw the bars, but we could just hard code a couple of elements in this div and they would appear. In fact, we can just do something like this, so bar, and we see 1, so let's make that 5, and we can see the height is kind of off, and that is because we need to the layout inside this div need to be specified, and we want a horizontal flex box, so just we write flex here, and now it looks all right. And then we also need some spacing between the bars so we can see, so let's make that gap 3, and now we can see them with the red background. All right, but we don't want to hard code the bars, so we want to provide the bar chart component data, and from that data it should render the bars. And for each bar we need a value and we need a name, and I think so the data will be an array of this object. And since we're using TypeScript, I can create an interface for that, so we get editor support, so we don't forget the fields. And I like to create a file called protocols when dealing with different interfaces and stuff like that. It's a bit overkill for this purpose since we will only have one interface, but it's clear what we are doing at least. So export interface bar data, and that should have a name, which is a string, and then a value, and that should be a number. All right, and so we create a prop, and in Svelte we do export let, and then bars data, I guess, which should be bars data. Oh, this script needs to be of language TypeScript before I can add the types, so lang ts bar data, and that should be an array. And now in this we can iterate over each element, so let's say in each loop, so bars data as bar data, and we need to close this like that, and then bar. Now, of course, each bar will need to be of a different size, and so we'll need to add some kind of prop to the bar. But before, we can see that the component disappeared, and that's because we haven't provided any data to the component, so it's an error at the moment. So we need to create the bars data, and I think the best way to do it and to make it a bit more visual with the changes and animation and stuff like that, I create a function to generate the data. So let's say const generate bars data. And to be clear, this should return a bar data. This should be lang ts as well. Bar data. This should be a bar data array, which it's returning. Alright, so how should that data be created? I guess that if we have a couple of bars, they should correspond to some kind of property. And let's say that each bar represents some kind of value for a person. So if we create an array of names, so let's say names equals 2, and then we imagine some names. So let's say Carl, Anna, Eric, Hugo, and John maybe. And then to make it the correct return type, we do return and then names and do a map of that. And for each element in the array, we do name, so we get the element, and do a return again. Alright, so we need to return the object. So the name should be the name, and we can just write it like that in JavaScript. But then we also need a value, and we don't know what the value represents at the moment, and it doesn't really matter since the bar chart can represent a bunch of different things. But let's say that it's a value that is in the range of 1 or 0 to 1000, let's say. And to create that, we specify the property and then math random. And that is a number between 0 and 1. So let's multiply that with 1000. And to ensure that it's an integer, it doesn't have to be, but it feels good when we have integers. We can do a math random on that. Now it's complaining on something, so let's see. Oh, all right. Round. Now it should be all right. And the function isn't complaining anymore. So let's also create a property. So let bars data equals to generate bars data. And then to see our animations when they appear, we want to make the bars change, so their data basically. And to make that happen, we could do an interval. So let's say set interval and then specify an anonymous function, and we could do bars data and then the same function, since the function will return different results each time since it's a random result. And we could let's say that these functions should run every 500 milliseconds. Great, so now we pass this data to the component, and good. It should have the data. It doesn't know how to resize the bars yet, but we will fix that. So in the bar, it's just a div for the moment. But let's say we want to make this vary in height. And we want to make it with an animation. And we want also to animate a property which can be animated smoothly. And so I think the best way to do it is to animate transform property scale in the y direction. So we do a vertical scale on each bar and make sure that the transform origin is from the bottom. So they go up and down from the bottom with an animation. So we could probably write this in Tailwind as well, But since we're working in SvelteKit, it's quite, or Svelte, it's quite simple to just add the CSS for this. So let's create a style tag. And the styles is also scoped here, so we could just do a div style. And let's say, so we do a transform and then scale y, and we need a value for this. So let's say that we get the value from a variable, CSS variable. So we can call it height maybe. All right. And in the bar chart component, we want to in some way pass this height to the bar component. So the bar knows this CSS variable and then can transform. And so in Svelte we can provide the CSS props like this with 2 dashes in the beginning and height we called it. Now what should the value be here? We're iterating over bars data, so we have the bar data and we have bar data and we can take bar data.value and get the value. But the problem is that this is a value with a range that is not between 0 and 1, so we can't just pass that into the transformation. We need to scale this value with the biggest one it could be, and the biggest one is the biggest value of all the bars. So we want to find the maximum value of the bars, so the biggest bar basically. And we want to make that the biggest value reactive as well to the data. And in Svelte, how we can do that is to use the $ syntax. So let's say max value equals 2, and now we need to find the maximum value of the bar chart or bars data array, and that isn't an array of numbers, but we can use map to fix that. So let's say we want to find the maximum, so let's say math max. All right, and then we also need to provide the data, so let's say bars data, and we want to map this, so it's an array of numbers, so map and data and return data.value. Now it's an array of numbers, but to make this syntax work we also need to add the dots, and now it should be alright. But as you can see, we haven't actually scaled the input yet, so we need to take this value and add it here like a division, like that. And now we can see the interval here is generating new data. It's scaling just fine. It's without animation for now, but it's scaling and it's doing it within the ranges. So if we go to the bar and then in here the style, we do transform origin and we say bottom, like that. Looks better. We also want to add a transition so that this element translates between 2 states with an animation. And you can do that in the raw CSS here, but I do it in Tailwind. So transition, it's simple as that. Now we can see it's animating just fine. However, for my taste, it's a bit fast, so maybe we should set a duration. And let's test 300 and save. That looks fine. All right, so we have the bars. They are animated. They look fine. They should scale. If we add another name here, let's say Sarah. We have 6 bars now. They all correctly positioned, and they have scale well. But now we need to add the lines, the dashed lines that we saw, we can remove these dashed lines, and it's 5 lines, 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100, and they should be in the background. So we will need to utilize absolute positioning, and I think a good way to do this is to create a component for each line, or we can call this is a component, and so it has one text, which is the number and the percentage sign, and then a line. And one could probably do this line in different ways, but one way to do it, I think, is to create a normal div and then just set a top border. So just the top of the div should have the border, and make that border dashed. And that should give us this result, I think. So let's make that. So we go back to the code, we can open Chrome as well. We add a new component, so we can call this just a line. That's simple and good. All right, so it should be a div that contains the text and the line, and since they are next to each other horizontally, it can be a flexbox, which is horizontal. And now we need a text, so I think a paragraph is good. We used bold in the design, so let's say font bold, text content. That was a size that I specified in the Tailwind config file. And then it should also be blue, so I named that just blue, so blue, and we can see we get a preview of the color as well. All right, that should be fine, I guess. Now it should have the percentage, so let's just hard code 100% for now. And then next to this one we should have the dashed line, and we make this a div like we said, and let's set a border top of 2, and we make it a border dashed. We also make the border the same blue. That should be all right. If we go back to the bar chart component now, we will need to add this in the background behind the bars. So this is the parent, and if we are going to use an absolute positioned element in this, we can make this relative, and we add a children div, which we make absolute with 100% width, 100% height, something like that. And then we add the line component to preview how it looks for the moment, like that. And we can add 3 for now. Okay, so we don't see anything, but this should also be a flexbox, and it should be flex call. And this wasn't saved, so let's save that. Now we can see something at least. We just see the text, and we don't see the line. So what can it be that's wrong? Let's see. All right, this needs a width, and I want it to take as much space as it can. So let's make this flex 1. All right, so now we can see the dashed lines, and it looks all right. It looks kind of like how we wanted it to, but we can also see that the text isn't really aligned with the line. So since this is a flexbox, we can do items center, and now it looks all right, and maybe a gap between them. So let's say gap 2. That looks all right. Okay, so it shouldn't say 100% everywhere. So let's say percentage here. We don't have anything named percentage yet, but we will fix that. So let's say we create a script tag, and now we make sure it's lang TypeScript. Close that and create a prop. So export let percentage. That should be a number. And now we have that, and we can convert this to a string as well. And now we need to provide that to the components here. I think the best way to do this is to maybe create an array of percentages that we want. So percentages, and that from top to bottom is 100, 75, 50, 25, and 0. And now we can iterate over that. So let's say each percentages as percentage, and close the iterator, the each loop. And now we add the component here with the prop. And since they match in names, we don't have to write percentage equals to percentage. We can just write like this and close that and remove these. Nice, so now we have 0, 25, 50, 75, 100. That looks fine. We also want them to be have a space between each other, and that space should be maximum possible. So let's say justify between. That looks all right. But now we have a problem, and that is the lines don't really align with the bottom and the top, which they should do. And the reason for that is that they have a height, and so when the flexbox layouts the elements, it takes the height in consideration. The top of the element is now of the top, but we don't want it that way. We want the line to be on the top. So a little cheat that we can do to fix that is to just say that height equals to 0, and then it works, because now it won't take in consideration the height of the element, and thus spacing between will give us this result. So that looks fine. All right, so I think we can remove the colors now. We are familiar how the layout looks. So remove that, that, and that. And it starts to look all right. Now I think we will add another div here, and that should be constrained with the same width. So I think I will move this width constraint to the parent, and it won't change any of the parents for now. The height can stay here, but I think we should make that 400. It seems a bit too tall now. And to make it a bit better looking, we could also add a space between the text and the components here. So let's just make a div and set a height for that. So let's say 100 pixels maybe. Like that. And that looks all right. So what we need to do now is that we need to make the circle with the index and also the mapping with the names below. And I think I will create a component for the index circle. So let's say new file, and we can call it circle, actually, just circle svelte. And since it will display an index, we can give a prop for that to begin with. So let's make export let index and then set number, since it should be a number. And now we want to make a circle, and the way to do that is just to create a square div, give it a border, and make the borders fully round. So a div, we do a width, so let's say 40 pixels, and a height 40 pixels, and this should be a border of 2, border blue, the same color as before, and rounded full. Now the circle should also contain the index, which is a text. We make that a paragraph, so let's say index here. And I think we can reuse the style from the percentages. So if you go to line and then the paragraph here and just copy the styles like that. Now we can see how it looks. So if we go to the bar chart component, we will need to add it here. So let's say div, we want to lay out the circles horizontally, so a flex, and it should be one circle for each bar. So we do an each again, so bars data as bar data, but we won't need the object for now, so I will just do this an underscore, and in Svelte we can take the index as a second argument and close that. And now I add a component, so let's say circle and the index. Now the index will start at 0, so let's say index equals to index plus 1 and close that. See how it looks. Alright, so it looks fine, I guess. We need to make this align with the bars, and we also make we want the number to be aligned in the circle. So this is a flex box, so we can write items center and then justify center as well. That should, all right, it isn't a flex box yet, so flex now. Okay, all right, and then we also want these to align with the bars. And how can we do that? Well, the proportion thing with flex 1 and flex 8, we want the same proportion so we can be sure that they have the same space to use. And so I think if we copy this and put it here, and then instead of this flex 8 thing, we replace it with a new one and give this flex 8 again, like that. Now this is a vertical flex box, so to make this work we need to wrap it in a horizontal one. So let's say flex and then add this as children. Alright, so now it aligns, but they still don't align with the bars, but they at least begin at the same place. So how can we fix this? Well, I think to begin with we could, well, one bar will take as much place as it can, and you do that by using flex 1, and then we have a gap of 3 here. So I think we can use the same pattern for this one. So if we go to the circle and add a wrap of this, and just for visualizing the layout, we can do a background of, let's say, green, and we say this should take as much space as possible, but each circle should share the space. So that means flex 1. This looks a bit better. And then we also need to add the gap 3, like we used before. And now we can see that it aligns perfectly with each bar. But we also want the circle to be in the center of the green boxes. So if I go back to the circle and then say flex on this one as well, and then justify center, that looks all right. And then we want a bit of a spacing between the bars and the circle, so in the main component we add this spacer again, so div class height, and this should maybe be 20 pixels, and close this one. That is maybe a bit too much, so let's say 10. Alright, that probably looks fine. And then we go back to the circle and remove the background color. Alright, that looks fine. So the last thing we need to do is to add the mapping to the names. And I think I will do that right in the components here. So let's say we want them to lie horizontally. But if we have a lot of bars, the names, or if the names are long, they might not have enough horizontal space. So we want them to wrap if they don't have enough space. So let's create a div. We make that a flex, and flex wrap. Now we can make that have some gap to begin with, since we will need that for later. Alright, so the text should be, let's say, a paragraph, and it should be the index and the name, and the index should be a bit more bold. So I create a span so I can add some custom styling to part of the text. So let's say font bold, and then we do an overall styling for the paragraph. So let's say text content. The text should be the dark one, but it is that by default, so we don't need to add that here. We can say that the name should have font light maybe, and that should be alright. And is in this flexbox to write all the names, we can do an each loop again. So each, and then bars data as bar data, and make sure to close it. We will need the index as well, so I add it here, but we also need the name, so we'll keep the object. And so in this span we write the index. So let's say index plus 1 again, and then a dot, since it's the number, and then a dot. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so that looks fine. And then we write a bar data and name. We should probably have a spacing here. And that looks fine. I guess we need to add some spacing so it doesn't lie just below the circles. So let's say div and then class height, and let's make this 50 pixels. That looks fine, I guess. I think we should make this gap a bit bigger, so let's say gap 6, maybe gap 5. Alright, so it might look good if the start of the list begins at the start of the first bar, and therefore is more aligned with the circles and bars. So it is a bit ugly to have the duplication, but we could reuse this relation 1 to 8 and use that again to get that effect. So if we do something like that, and then this one here, and then make sure it's flex 8. Alright, we need the wrapping div again, since we are in a column. So now it aligns with the first bar. I don't like to reuse numbers that could change like this, which need to stay consistent. So one way we could fix that, it isn't really necessary since we're using it just 3 times between each other or next to each other, but we could use variables to state them just once and use that variable or constant. So first flex, let's set that 1, second flex and make that 8. Now we could add it here, and then instead of 8 we put second flex, and now we do the same for the other ones, so we can be confident that the flex relation will always stay the same and that they depend on the constants that we added on the top, like that. Alright, something like that. So now we use the constants, so we can be sure that it's the same value everywhere. Alright, I think the chart is done. We can see it animates between the states. We have the lines for different percentages. We have the mapping between indexes and names. So yeah, thank you for watching.